the late 1950s, a forest near my area sat entirely unnoticed by humanity, save for the few grave sites and graveyards that were scattered throughout the forest. And then, in the beginning of the 1960s, a building company came into the area, leveled many of the cemeteries, and built a road through the main one that became the entrance to the neighborhood that they built on top of the forest. This neighborhood has always been known for strange activity, but it was finished, and Hell House, my family's house, was finished in 1966. Yeah. And a family of two, a young couple, moved in, and after 2 years of living in the house, they fled, leaving everything behind. And then my family, my grandfather and my grandmother, and at the time their one daughter, my mother, moved into Hell House when my mom was 4 years old in 1968. And the first story I'd like to tell you about is, sorry about that. The first story isn't really about ghosts, it's mostly about my upbringing, because when I was born, my grandmother still lived in Hell House, but my mother had moved out and was living with my dad, her now husband. So my first experiences with Hell House were as a child going to visit my grandmother, and the first few stories I'll be telling you that are actually spooky will involve me visiting the house when my grandmother was still alive and still living with her, or living there. Things didn't really ramp up though until after she died, and my parents made the foolhardy choice to move into the most haunted place I've ever known. So yeah, I don't know if it's they moved out because of the fact that the houses were built over cemeteries or what, but the first family that lived there skedaddled pretty quickly and left everything behind, much like in the Amityville, which I still don't know if I believe in, but this I do because I lived it. Okay, in order for you to understand the first story, you have to understand the layout of the house. So I'm going to try to draw it here. This is going to be the living room. Basic box structure here. And here's the front door. Kitchen goes in like this, and there's an entryway to other rooms. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then there's a partition right here, right against the door. So the door swings out this way into the house, leaving no space here. So this would be like, yeah, the width of a person here. Okay, so you understand that. So there's an entryway. Whenever they first moved into the house, my grandfather started noticing that every morning the door to the house would be wide open and the house would be freezing cold, because this happened in the winter. So he thought that maybe his daughters were, or daughter at the time, and I think there was only one, he was afraid that my mom was sleepwalking. So he laid with his head up against the door in that partition, so that if she was going to be sneaking in and opening the door would bang him on his head and he would be woken up, or she'd have to step on him to get to the door. Well, in the morning, he woke up freezing cold. The door had swung wide open, seemingly through his body, and he's a fireman, or was a fireman, and was in the military and all that, Marine Corps. He didn't really believe in ghosts and stuff until he moved into Hell House, and he did not have an explanation for the door opening. And after he realized it wasn't his daughters doing it, they would just close it in the morning and not really talk about it at all. But whenever we moved into the house, doors would open on their own all the time. But that was one of the very first stories I ever heard about Hell House that happened when my mom was a child. Yeah. I think these are going to be the last one I do for the day. It's getting pretty darn late. I can't talk very loud because we're all going to bed. But yeah, got one actual ghost story, and the door opening up on my papa. Didn't bonk him on his head. Okay guys, I'm so sorry it took me so long to get back to this. My life has been going off on all the rails, but I now can share some more scary stories. Make sure you watch my previous Hell House videos so you are up to date on what's happened so far. When my aunt was 2 years old, she lived in the little room in the back, and that is also known as the Red Room, because for about a week she would toddle out into the living room at 1:15 a.m. and tell my grandparents that she was woken up by shiny red lights. And my grandfather finally decided to sleep in the room in there and see what was happening. And he fell asleep, and at 1:15 a.m. he says bright, dazzling red orbs started flying around the room, and they had come in through the window, and they were so bright that it woke him up. And I don't remember this next part, but when my mom was pregnant with my brother, I was about 3.5, maybe a little younger than that. We went to Hell House to stay the night with my grandmother, who still lived there at the time. This would have been 1993. And I was playing in the little room in the back, which was set up as a children's playroom, and I fell asleep. And my mother and grandmother were in the kitchen talking, and at 1:15 to 1:20 a.m., I toddled out of that bedroom and told my mom that shiny bright lights woke me up. And Mom and Grandma shared the look, and we all packed up and stayed the night at our house instead. And when we moved in there when I was 12. We moved in when I was 12. I did not want the red room, but there was no bedroom that you could take where you couldn't see the red room. And even from the room that I took at night at around 1:15 to 1:20 a.m., that room would always light up red, and I never figured out why. See? She remembers. It wasn't just me who experienced these things, which is how I know it's not any of my mental illnesses that was making us experience this. Everyone who went into this house had horrifying experiences. So, yeah, if you want to know things about someone else who's been in the house, she was there a lot. Alright, I'm tired. I'm going to bed. I'll post some more tomorrow. Good night. Well then, let's do another one then, shall we? This one's a little weird. My grandmother always said that in the forest behind Hell House, there were aliens, and she would see the bright white lights flying around in the forest. And one day in the 60s, when my grandparents were headed out to go on a date, my grandfather went out to the car first to get it started. It was a little cold outside, and my grandmother came out a little bit after him. And my grandfather was sitting in the car, and he says, a bright white light came down from the sky, from nowhere, and illuminated my grandmother on the front porch of Hell House. Inside the light, she froze, as if time had been frozen. And Papa got out of the car and ran up to her, tried to shake her. She couldn't move. She didn't see him. Nothing was working. She was just frozen in time in this bright white light. And then the light vanished, went back up into the sky, and Grandma acted like nothing had happened and was surprised to find Papa suddenly out of the car and freaked out, and she didn't remember anything happening, and it was to her as if she had just walked out of the house and Papa appeared in front of her freaked out. And then when I was about 14, we had a Girl Scout a little camping thing with the Girl Scouts in my backyard. And I had to pee. I went into the house, and I came back out, and everyone was screaming. Everyone had seen the white lights in the sky and in the trees, and I fucking missed it because I have a tiny bladder, and I am still pissed off to this day that I missed the white lights. I want to see the fucking aliens. I have no clue if the aliens are attached to the hauntings or if they're even aliens or what, but my grandma was 100% convinced that there were UFO activity and alien activity in the forests behind Hell House. So when I was about, I'd say 10, my grandmother, who lived there at Hell House, she got breast cancer, and we started spending a lot more time over there. And over the course of 2 years, we painted the house green, and we got a new green roof for her, and got it all spruced up. And right before the house got finished, she done kicked the bucket. And I was 12 at the time, and my mom was not in a place to make any sort of decisions about our life, so my dad decided a few months after my grandmother died that we were gonna move to Hell House. And that's what it looked like when we lived there. I found a picture from Google. You can see my mom's beautiful gardens and everything in the front. This is, I believe, from 2008. That's my dad's red car in the front. And this tree right here, you can't see it, but there's an axe head in the front that my grandmother put there, and the tree has grown around it. Yeah, that's Hell House as it was when I lived in it. And this is Hell House as it currently stands in 2019 with the current owners. They have changed all of the green trimmage and toned down the green of the house a lot. So it's almost unrecognizable, but that's Hell House. And when we moved in, I already knew all the horror stories about it, and Hell House is right about there on this street. And this is the dead end that I used as a sort of safe meditation place to get away from the craziness of the house. And I knew about all of the bedrooms in this house. And the only bedroom, there were three. There was the little red room. There was the back room that faced the haunted woods, the horrifying woods. And then there was this front room right here where this window you can see right here. That was my bedroom window, right there. I faced the street. So most of the stories that you hear are going to happen in that front bedroom right there, because that is where I spent most of my time. If I wasn't outside at the end of the street or back in the woods this way, not that way behind the house. I did not like going behind the house, but that way was typically okay if I didn't go too deep. But that is the foundation for the beginning of my experiences at Hell House. There's a lot more stories that aren't mine, but I'm tired of telling other people's stories. I want to tell my stories. So here is the beginning. We moved into Hell House when I was 12. So once I chose the front room, knowing what the other rooms would have in store for me, I started cleaning out my grandmother's things. And she had a lot of weird things. Off the top of my head, I remember foam mannequins that had weird faces drawn on them that she would keep her cancer wigs on. A collection of really ancient Avon bottles of perfume that were like really fancy. And of course, the ticking clocks. My grandma had like at least 15, 20 ticking alarm clocks in her room that were hidden all over the bedroom. And the first night, I hadn't gotten to all of the clocks. There was still a shit ton of clocks in there, and it was a cacophony. I could not sleep. So the next day, I focused on the clocks, and I followed the sound of the ticking until the room was completely silent, and I put all the clocks in a box in the garage. Well, that night, I was sitting in my room alone, drawing, and I decided to go to bed. Everyone else was already asleep, and it was still kind of filled with my grandmother's things, so it wasn't really my room yet. But as I went to sleep, or went to bed, I started hearing a ticking clock. And there hadn't been a ticking clock in there all day. And so I was really freaked out. I couldn't sleep because the ticking just got louder and louder and louder until I finally went out into the garage and I grabbed one singular clock and put it back in the room so that at least the ticking had a purpose. I knew where it was coming from, and then I could fall asleep. But now I understood why Grandma had all those ticking clocks in there. It was to cover the sound of the ticking in the room, and I would never stay in that room without a clock in there because even without a clock in there, you would hear the ticking. And a few years after we lost Hell House, me and a friend may have broken into Hell House when no one lived there, and all of our stuff was still just kind of there. No one had cleaned out the house or anything. It was just abandoned. And on the wall where one of our clocks in the living room had hung, you could still hear ticking from where the clock had been. And that house just had a weird thing with clocks and the sound of clocks that weren't there. I don't know, but I always had a clock in my room to cover the sound of the ticking. So once I chose the front room, knowing what the other rooms would have in store for me...
No, the ticking never stopped. Their parents painted the room, tried to make it seem a lot different, but nothing ever changed. The ticking was always there. And if it wasn't, you should be worried. There was a lot of things that happened in that house that, we can't explain away. And, we lived it, we experienced it, it was all real.
Well then, let's do another one then, shall we? This one's...
I was there for that. There was a lot more going on than just some freak accident or whatever. It was scary. I really don't know what to say, but that area is freaky as fuck. We have gone back in those woods and found some real creepy stuff. So, I don't know. I don't know what's going on back there.